Welcome to Shared Insights, the podcast from BA Insight. I'm Jeff Fried, and I'm on location here in Dublin with my friend Christian Buckley, who's been on the podcast before. Welcome, Christian.
It's good to be here, Jeff.
And Dublin is quite a fun city, don't you think?
Well, I've not seen a whole lot. I mean, what I was telling somebody, it's like my view of Dublin is like, well, I've walked across the bridge from the hotel to the convention center several times, and it's a lovely little walk.
Yes, absolutely. And it gets dark early, too.
It does get dark.
Pretty far north.
Yeah. But it's actually been beautiful weather for this time of year, and when you're we're early November, it's rained a little bit, but we've had a lot of clear skies and it's made some beautiful views out of the site of the convention center.
Right. At the convention, the European SharePoint Convention is one of my favorites.
Yeah. ESPC 17.
Yeah.
It's this is the 6th event. I've been to all 6.
Wow.
Didn't realize I was at the first one when it was the first one, and I actually had one of the top-rated sessions of that one. That was back when I was talking about social inside of SharePoint,
right,
while no one else was talking about social. So that was 7 years ago.
Always on the leading edge, then.
There you go, bleeding edge.
Bleeding edge. It's been about a year since you went full-time on CollabTalk. How's it going?
It's going really well. It's I complain that I'm at home, that I'm just like, I need help on this. I need to, like everybody, any small business, I need to hire people. I'm actually in the process. I'm looking for admin help part time. So doing that search.
It's good problem to have, and when
it doesn't feel good when you're in
it,
but yes, it is a good problem to have. So yeah, it's been successful. It's started January 1st, so I'm almost at that 1 year mark, and my wife asks, is like, you seem stressed out. I'm like, it's a different stressed out though when you're busy but enjoying the stuff that you're working on versus not enjoying what you're working on, stressed out. So
yeah. And at least from the outside, the work product and the things you're doing are very high quality and great.
Well, thanks.
I of course try to keep tabs on the hybrid things.
Yep.
And
just still going, still moving forward. Yeah.
And we talked about the state of hybrid the last time, but it was just before you published your first research, and you've now done a couple more reports. I know you had a session here about it. What's your view of how hybrid SharePoint is developing?
Well, it's interesting because the timing of that report, when I put that project together, so I had actually reached out to Dan Holm and Jeff Tieper with Microsoft and said, hey, there's a gap there in data around hybrid SharePoint specifically. Would this be something that you would be interested in funding? And Jeff Tieper immediately is like, yes, no, I know that this is a gap, like it's been talked about. We'd love to do this. And so that came together, and that project was part of the impetus for creating a standalone business, CollabTalk, to be able to go and do other research projects. And then the time frame for that, so the data came out in April in the report, and we had Microsoft and some leading SIs, so B&R Business Solutions and Pixel Mill consulting companies that were the lead sponsors, and then a bunch of other ISVs and like AvePoint that I'm here working with and stuff that were part of that. But the timing of the release of that was around the same timing of Microsoft of their broader new positioning around hybrid.
Yeah.
And which Microsoft is, traditionally has been like, hasn't been the leading voice out in that, and they recognize that they need to come back and retool that positioning. And Julia White, who we know through the SharePoint world and Office, is kind of the poster child on for marketing for Microsoft Hybrid. And so they had another huge global study around hybrid environments and what does hybrid look like, released about the same time that we released our findings that were specifically around SharePoint. So it was great timing to have that out there.
And the trio, by which I mean SharePoint, Exchange, and Skype for Business, have been hybrid for some time.
Right.
But the big news all up as a new thing is the Azure Stack release.
Right, and so that's why I try not to, when I go in and talk about hybrid, I try to talk about it in the broadest of descriptions, definitions of that there could be hybrid where you are all on-prem SharePoint and business reasons for that, and yet starting to use OneDrive, or maybe use Yammer as a standalone and separate. Or some people look at it and say, well, we have on-prem SharePoint, but we want to start using Office 365, and we have some SharePoint Online as part of that, but it's very specific scenarios, all valid, so that there are these separate hybrid environments. Now, I think the truest, the way that we think when we describe this is where you have SharePoint that has some assets that are on-prem and some online. So maybe you are starting to blend or federate your environments, and so that your all net new team sites, when you go and create a new team site, it's now provisioned in the cloud, and that you may still have your intranet or portions of your intranet pointing back to the on-prem, but from a user interface, they have no idea whether it's on-prem or the cloud unless they dig into the URL and where links are going to things.
Yeah, so you can sort of lead with the cloud with the new stuff.
Right.
And create a user experience which is modern and keeps up with Microsoft without disrupting everything.
Well, that's the kind of the point. I think Microsoft had they kind of woke up to the fact that their messaging wasn't working, and with the talk of the last 2 years, they've done an amazing job at starting now. And it was the May the 4th event last year, I think, where they started using the phrasing of help organizations pull cloud experiences down to their on-prem environments. And that was a better way. Instead of this push, if you're marketing, it's like push marketing is not as effective as pull marketing.
Right.
Meaning
so rather than saying cloud, you're going to go to the cloud, and hybrid is a temporary way, it's your on-ramp.
Right.
I do think the maturity of this is a technique that you may want to use indefinitely for a variety of purposes, and it's less of a sort of hard sell and less alienating. It's much more real.
Right. Well, and I think that was a couple things that we found in our research. I mean, one thing, it's always interesting to look at what is the dollar value, the size of this space, and again, just SharePoint, not looking at other, hybrid components, but just the SharePoint assets and licensing. And we estimated the size, just to give people an idea. It's currently in early 2017, was at $3.2 billion space.
So that's big, however you look at it.
Right, and that by 2020 it was growing to like 5.2 or 5.3 billion. So it's a growth of that. But one of the questions we asked was whether you were moving to hybrid as like a forced, like you have no other choice but to go and do this, or is it like a transitory step? Not that you're forced, but is it a transitory step on your way to the cloud?
Right.
Versus it's a permanent strategy. And I think what was the one surprising stat of the data that we captured there was how many organizations said, no, this is our plan. We do not have a plan to not have an on-prem component. Therefore, hybrid is our long-term strategy. And those kind of data points, I think Microsoft didn't see, wasn't looking at. But in the last 2 years, especially the last year, and you see this now with the announcements around SharePoint 2019, is that one of the highlights that they're focusing on is the fact that more hybrid capabilities, enabling organizations to make it easier for them to have hybrid solutions. And so that's part of their planning. I mean, they're actually thinking about features and how it works in those hybrid scenarios, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I'm certainly from the being insight perspective, as search specialists, we're seeing a big uptick in cloud hybrid search. Mm-hmm. I had 2 sessions actually this week, one at SP TechCon, one here at ESPC on cloud hybrid search. Both were well attended, and people are no longer just sort of trying to figure out what their strategy is, they're really implementing.
Right. Well, it's interesting. My last session here was around groups and teams and conversation as a service. I know with a 60-minute session too, and somebody's going to provide feedback, but like, you didn't really get much into the conversation as a service part of that, yeah. kind of ran out of time, and there are some good questions. It was great to have audience participation.
Right.
But from a search standpoint, I was made the point, I'd like to get your thoughts on the comments that I made about the goal is for all of these workloads, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, Yammer, Exchange, no matter what the workload, the product is, the idea is that all of the documents, all of the conversations, any artifact, automated or manually input into these user experiences will be tied to, or the data go into the graph and accessible through the graph.
Right.
And what that then does is, from a search standpoint, from a pulling intelligence out of automation, business intelligence, out of all these technologies, I mean, it's kind of funny. It all comes down to the importance of search at the end of that. Because when so there's the whole, part of what I try to address is this whole which tool to use when.
Right.
I don't like that question, but it's valid only because today you have to think about how the artifacts from each of the workloads are being captured. And it's not all in the graph. It's not all consistent. There's different locations for different things.
Right.
And to manage that. And that makes a more complex search experience. Once they are all going into the graph.
So there's several areas where Microsoft is doing things in quick and not necessarily completely coherent ways.
Right.
You talked about which tool to use, specifically in the sort of Teams, Yammer, team sites, the area that is all loosely tied together with groups.
Right.
Which I'd love to talk more about.
Yeah.
And in search, for sure, I see this tension between each new service wanting to have good findability within it, and also wanting to play as a good citizen in the all-up graph experience.
Right.
And there's a splintering of different search experiences, which is confusing people.
And they went and just created that new Office.com
Office.com
search.
experience, yeah.
I was like, why would you not modify one of the 4 other search experiences out there?
Well, I actually
Create
count
a new one.
9 search experiences,
9?
not
Oh,
counting
I didn't
Exchange.
know. Okay.
And I have a betting pool
Wow.
for
We need 10.
At next Ignite, how many will there be?
Yeah, seriously.
So I'll send you that pool, and you can place your chips. But that's very, very confusing. But it's also, if you take a step back and say, the goal is not to have one search experience for everything.
Right.
You need, tailoring it to where you are makes sense.
Of course.
If you're on a hub site, it makes sense. So it's not a problem by itself that there are multiple experiences. It's a problem when as you say, the artifacts aren't discoverable or can't be found in e-discovery, can't be tracked.
That's where I would say that when you're talking about those kinds of, even from a legal standpoint, if I can't, from a compliance standpoint, as a compliance officer, be able to go in and find the data that I need, I don't have the right permissions, but across these different environments, what does that experience look like? There are needs to be able to go and look across, but I would even argue, I understand having the separate search experiences, and that with the whole refiner's concept of it being intelligent about where I am within the environment, to auto-apply refiners that says, okay, well, you're over in this subset of an area. If you're doing a search, you're likely going to be looking for something within that subset, and we can improve the performance of the search by modifying that. I get all that. But then I think of, if I'm and I have one of the presentations I do around Microsoft 365 and tying this all things together. There is also a valid scenario where I'm on my desktop, hooked up to the internet, permissions with all these different workloads, and I go and perform a search. I want that search to find the things that are local on my desktop, that are in the SharePoint environments, team sites, Yammer groups, all of that, as well as accessed via conversations happening in my professional network in LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I want all of those things and public internet results coming back if relevant.
And probably things from non-Microsoft systems too.
Correct. I want all of those things, coming back and then be able to do something with that. I just want to make sure that it's being accessed. Because one of the frustrating things, too, is that when you go in looking for the answers to something, it's like, well, it's not in the encyclopedia, therefore there's no answer for it. No. there's no answer in that encyclopedia.
Right.
But you don't know what you don't know. And so having access to more data, you just need better refiners and access.
Talk about a little bit about what you're seeing with Teams. This is probably the fastest moving target. And I know you've been spending a lot of time
there's
with
a lot of marketing around that too, and I don't know like the data, like how, because SharePoint was the fastest selling Microsoft product in history. Then Office 365 came out, and they said, well, it was faster than SharePoint. It's like, yeah, but Office 365 is not really a product. It has SharePoint and Exchange and things in it, so it's not really one.
It's a bundle.
I don't know how. So it's a SKU. I don't know how Teams is performing from that perspective, but what resonates to me about Teams and what makes it different is that it has the chat capability, of course, which is, I'm a social collaboration guy. It's critical that we have that capability, but the whole contextual collaboration concept I've been saying for years and talked about social as being that connecting fabric. Well, now you have the chat on the side, all of the tabs, so you can have whatever relevant SharePoint sites, Yammer groups, third-party tools, whatever it is, YouTube videos, Excel spreadsheets, a PDF, all in these tabs in context to that channel, that project that I'm working on. So if I'm like talking with you now, and we're like Jeff, let's go look at Project XYZ. We go over to the channel for Project XYZ. Everything we possibly need for that project is there.
Yeah.
Is accessible. Like, that's a pretty powerful story that is compelling to me. I'm excited about.
And there's a lot of extensibility. A lot of the announcements at Ignite were around that. There's where you hook in bots. Right. There's a lot of cool things.
A lot of cool things.
Do you think that Teams really is shaping up to be a quote-unquote Slack killer?
Definitely, it has some. Look, there's gaps. Let's be realistic about the problems that it still has. I mean, I can't just go and by email invite anybody that I want in there. But of course, it's also, they're building an enterprise grade, and secure and kind of all the other things. But the fact that it has, natively has the links to those other systems, the things that are, auto provisioning of, the other workloads that are part of that Slack doesn't have. It has deeper integration with third-party tools. And so all of that needs to happen for it to really be a Slack killer.
Right.
However, for those organizations that are in the Microsoft ecosystem and have SharePoint, that have, or that use Yammer, or that, and want to be able to leverage those assets, then I'm talking with Jeremy Thake at Hyperfish, and he says they're really just waiting for some key out-of-the-box integrations to be there, these other apps that they rely on, and then they're going to make the switch.
Yeah.
And it's just their business runs on certain apps. As soon as those apps are supported, they'll move it over. So I think that's the next barrier for Microsoft. There's a few capability things, but I think it's getting those other key mainstream apps over there, those integrations with bots and connectors, and then it's just going to be a floodgate. Why would I want to go to an outside tool to do all those things where I can do SharePoint, Exchange, the Office suite, all of those, and do everything Slack does in one place?
Cool. So do you have any advice for listeners when it comes to how they should approach Teams? Should they jump in with both feet now?
I do. I did a great interview over with Dyson today at the UK, and huge multi-geographic company, multinational, and they have, I think, 7 or 9 pilots with Teams happening right now. Yeah. What they did is they knew it was short term. They went and said, hey, we have a subset of like 50 users. They said, gave them provisioning capability, go and create Teams, let's see how this shakes out, how do people use it. And from that, they went through that first phase. They found like all of these different teams that were set up, and they had some of the same problems where it was proliferating the number of teams and channels, and then they were saying, well, I don't know where stuff is because I'm jumping between these different groups. And they assessed all of that. The feedback from that initial pilot was that they came up with 2 different core teams and the channels within that, and now they're doing, as I said, 7 or 9 pilots using the best practices that they learned from their culture and doing that next test. And so they're doing multiple layers of pilots, trialing that, taking the feedback, rolling it back, and developing, and then organically growing that, expanding that out.
There really is sort of becoming a best practice locally.
That meets the needs of the unique needs of the culture and their work habits.
It sounds like you see that as a good practice globally.
Look, I know it's a lot to go and manage. It's easier just to say that you will all now use this technology and roll it out, and that has never worked.
Yeah.
And we saw that like SharePoint, when you treat technology as a hammer and every problem looked like a nail, then a lot of people there's a lot of bent nails all over the place.
That's a good point.
But and so by doing that organically and pilot, and then learn from that and then grow it as it makes sense. I'm also a big fan of let the end users drive that process, because there are some initiatives, some organizations that say, they come back and say, the way that we're using SharePoint, that's what we need. We don't need to go use this other thing.
It sort of comes back to the pull, not push.
Correct. And that's why that story of, well, if we know eventually that all this data is accessible via the graph, and then we figure out what's the right search experience for that, but that it's all being collected, that it shouldn't matter if collaboration is happening via email, via Teams, via Yammer, via SharePoint, whatever it is, because eventually, from a compliance auditing and security standpoint, like, we can get to the data that we need to for those business reasons. It's just important for people to understand that's where it's going. Whatever that search experience is, the way of surfacing content may be different, but as long as we know that it's all going towards that back end and then being properly handled and managed through those workloads, it shouldn't matter what the front end looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we certainly live in exciting times.
A lot going on.
And it's cool to see you doing so well with CollabTalk.
Yeah, thanks.
And look forward to talking with you more. And is there anything you want to point out before we close this?
Yeah, I'd say that I've got a refresh on the website going live here in the next couple of weeks, but collabtalk.com. And then the big thing is, as you know, the hybrid research was one project. I have 4 that are happening right now. I'm going to do some more in the spring. So if there's organizations that are looking for unique data and talking points, these are independent research projects. I use graduate students, and I partner with the Marriott School at Brigham Young University, and so I am able to, on the fly, put together research teams around targeted topics. I would love to hear from companies. You can go to collabtalk.com and the contact form, and I'm already talking with 2 companies about January kicking off new research projects. So I'm hoping to, while I love talking product and go into all these different events and stuff, I really like the, to go in and do a deep dive and answer like 1 or 2 core questions on a problem, and then go and look at it from different angles and talk to people. And it's collaboration, Jeff, go and get it, people, all this feedback, and look at different perspectives. I mean, I just find that personally, like, really fulfilling to go and do deep and answer these questions. Not that we then come up with like the answer for things, but to have that kind of philosophical look at these technology problems. Because I'm a Microsoft ecosystem technology guy,
right.
But beyond SharePoint, that's a lot of fun, and I'm really looking to expand that side of CollabTalk in 2018.
That's great. Well, we'll put in some links in the show notes. And it's always great to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. It was great seeing you here in Dublin. I know we could both have fun looking around the city tomorrow.
I will. And on behalf of BA Insight, this has been Jeff Fried with Shared Insights, the podcast from BA Insight.